Subsidies are stupid.
We are just propping up products that people are not willing to pay the actual price for. Just let them fade into obscurity. We are wasting resources on things that no one actually wants. And that's not the only
Stupid
thing about subsidies. People are more than willing to pay for gasoline. But even that is subsidized. We are subsidizing some of the biggest, most profitable, most polluting companies in the world. That's
stupid.
Giving money to these businesses is
Stupid.
because no one apparently wants their products without subsidy. But giving out money to these businesses seems even more ridiculous. So subsidies must suck in their entirety, right? Well, I am not willing to believe that the people who create subsidies are dumb or malicious.
People are good.
In other words, I think that most subsidies are made with the idea to make the world a better place. And so I expect there are some good reasons for subsidies. Until now, it just seems stupid to me. But that's probably because I don't even know what a subsidy is exactly, let alone how they work and what effects they have. So, if you are curious too, stick around.
We're going on an adventure.
A subsidy is a direct or indirect payment, usually given out by state-run entities to alleviate some unpriced burden, which leads to a more efficient market. What? It's about running an efficient market? Oh, I wonder who benefits from that. Powerful and rich people are greedy bastards that exploit others for their own gain.
Money, 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 money. Everything's about money.
But money and markets don't tell you anything important. What about feelings? What about love? Money doesn't tell you if someone is happy. Money doesn't tell you if the work is fulfilling. Every cent of humanity is lost in these bastards.
But people are good.
So why would these people think that money is the right metric for the positive effects of a subsidy? There has to be at least a rationalization for thinking about money as good. So, what is it? I tried myself to see money as good. And to do that, I just needed to make a few assumptions. 1. People spend money on the things that are important to them. 2. They get their money by doing things that other people find important. And 3. What people find important is good. So I need to get rid of my moral prejudices like
Cocaine is bad and art is good.
and accept that good is only that which individuals find important. For some people that might be art, for some people that might be cocaine. If more money is spent, more things, or more important things, go to the people that want it most. And that's good. In this way, I can see that money is a pretty accurate measure of good. As far as I can think of, money is actually the easiest and relatively accurate way of measuring the good that people are doing for each other.
Oh, there's a few caveats.
Caveats there are, yes.
I will not really get rid of my moral prejudice against selling cocaine, for example. Because I think that even though people clearly want it, it would be better in general if they didn't get it. And I also know a lot of work that is not being paid for. So some things are counted that shouldn't be, and some things are not counted that should be. This means that if we look at individuals, the amount of money they make is not always saying so much about the good they do for the world. But this doesn't mean money doesn't measure anything.
Everybody gather round. Okay. It's time. Time for what? Oh, the time has come. The time for what?
The time has come.
The time for an example. Oh, an example, yeah, good.
Imagine a dealer that made $1 million from selling cocaine. I think he did bad things. But the buyers still thought they would get $1 million's worth of good feelings from the cocaine. And who am I to say that these good feelings didn't happen? I think they probably did. But I also expect there were a lot of bad feelings that are not paid for. An unprized burden. Money just doesn't care about the bad feelings in cases like this. I will go out on a limb here and say that money measures good, but not all good, and it often doesn't take the bad into account.
Captain, there is another problem.
Rich people can spend a lot more money on something than poor people, even if it's less important to them.
That kind of sucks.
However, with all that said, I can at least understand why I could use money as a measure of good. It's because every time you pay for something, you actually say, "This is important," like "This is good. Can I subscribe for more? This is valuable. I like this. Thanks for your..."
The x-axis in this graphic represents the quantity of a product and the y-axis represents its price. The aggregate amount paid by the consumers is indicated by the surface area of the polygon created by multiplying the x and y coordinates of point E. The consumer surplus is indicated by the area between points E, F and G. In an efficient and commoditized market, the cost to producers is indicated by the area under the supply line but to the left of the equilibrium point. This means that the producer surplus is indicated by the area above the supply line but below the area of the consumers.
First of all,
What?
and secondly,
What does this have to do with anything?
let alone subsidies. Subsidies will increase supply and demand, which is shown by moving the...
Boring.
Okay, say that I sell classical guitar concerts.
Boring.
If I give one concert quarterly, I can just do that for fun in my neighbor's shed. But when I give 25 concerts quarterly, it would be my full-time job. So not only do I have to give up my other job, which might pay pretty well, I'd also need to rent a helicopter, of course, which is more expensive because I started out walking. Therefore, the price per concert needs to go up if I give more concerts. And that leaves us with this line. For a given price, I can only give so many concerts. Exactly! Who is going to book my concerts and for what price? Well, there might be a single person that's willing to pay a lot because I am the only guitarist in town that can play that one piece that his mum always listened to. So it's very important to him that I play at his wedding. But there's also people that wouldn't even want classical guitar music if it was free. And everything in between. So, for a given price, only so many people want concerts. And this is the only point where my audience and I agree on price and quantity.
How do we get there?
Well, when I would only give one concert,
I can make a lot of profit.
not only that, since these costs also include opportunity costs, I could make a lot of profit there that I cannot make anywhere else. So I'd want to do more. But in order to sell that second concert, you see, I have to lower my price a bit. Although it's still the most profitable thing I can do by far. So
I do more and more and more and more.
Until, of course, I end up at the equilibrium point. Here, I can't go any further, because I would have to ask more than people would be willing to pay. This is the total amount consumers are paying. The price of the concert times the amount of concerts. This is the consumer surplus. That's how much people would have been willing to pay, but didn't have to. You can see that as a profit for the buyers. It doesn't show up in money, but just in fun or something else important that they didn't have to pay for. And these are my costs. And that means that this is my profit. The added value to society that does show up as money.
Let's add a little subsidy.
Let's say that the government pays back a certain amount of the booking costs to the buyers of concerts. And since people are
Perfect spheres in a vacuum.
they would be willing to pay the exact same amount out of their own pockets, which means that they would be willing to pay the amount of the subsidy on top of that.
Profit.
And when the government pays me back some of the costs, they would be lower, of course.
Profit.
Wait a minute.
That's the same thing.
Say you are a company. In which of the following scenarios do you receive a subsidy?
A.
When you are allowed to pollute a river.
2.
When the government gives you money.
C.
When you do not have to pay taxes. Or
D.
when the government gives money to your customers. The correct answer is
All of them.
Let's start with the river pollution. When a company does dirty things like that, someone else,
Pays the price.
the farmers downstream, for example, who get a smaller harvest and subsequently can't buy tickets to my concert. In turn, I might delay buying new strings, and so on and so on. So eventually, society as a whole loses out and literally
Pays the price.
that the company should have paid for better waste management. But because the company doesn't have to do this, their costs are lower than they should be, and we are paying for it. This is the same as a subsidy for better waste management. We pay for it collectively. In the case of a subsidy,
It's paid with taxes.
in which case we lose out on a bit of profit. And in the case we let them pollute the river, we pay by not having some of the profit in the first place. It's clear that paying taxes and then getting a subsidy equal to that amount is the same as not having to pay taxes in the first place. However, there is one point remaining.
That's a bit weird.
Why doesn't it matter whether a company or the consumer gets the subsidy? When the government wants me to sell more concerts, they should pay me because I have higher costs per concert. But people only want to buy more for a lower price. A subsidy can only bridge this gap and is therefore split between buyers and sellers. Although,
Why shouldn't I just keep it?
I could just keep the extra profit and not give more concerts.
Screw these people.
Well, this leaves the door open for someone else to give concerts at a lower price. And not only do they get
These people.
as customers, why would
Those people.
pay more for a concert than they have to? So yeah, if I don't lower my price, someone else will do it for me. And consumers have a similar problem when they get the money. If
These people.
all want concerts for this price because of a subsidy, there wouldn't be enough concerts. So, who gets to buy it then? Well,
Those people.
who find it more important and are therefore willing to pay more. In either case, the subsidy is split between buyers and sellers. It just doesn't matter who gets the subsidy. We can subsidize my grandma and most of it will still end up in the hands of big oil. I know how this goes. This sucks. Subsidies suck. We pay more taxes, but who gets the benefit? That's right. The incidence of a subsidy, so where the money goes, is not determined by who gets handed the money, as we have just seen. It is, however, determined by how the buyers and sellers react to changes in price. It's called their elasticity. If, for example, just one person supports me on Patreon when it's €6 a month, but 500 people will if I just lower the price to €3 a month, that would mean that the demand for my Patreon is
Pretty elastic.
There's a big difference in the amount of people with a small difference in price. And when it's one person at €6 and still one person at 3, that would be inelastic.
Thanks, Mom.
And as you can see, elasticity is shown by a very flat line and inelasticity by a very steep line.
What does this have to do with anything?
Well, a subsidy can only bridge the gap between the price sellers want to get and the price buyers want to pay.
Like this.
And when we draw a line from the old equilibrium point, we can see that in this case the subsidy is split evenly. Both sellers and buyers get half the subsidy. The price to buy drops by half the subsidy amount, and the price producers get is increased by half the amount of the subsidy. But when one side is more elastic, they get less of the subsidy. And when one side is steeper, it gets more. So I thought, the less elastic you are, the better, right? No. Say that I and my fellow musicians give roughly the same amount of concerts, whether we get paid or not. So you would think we are inelastic and therefore get the brunt of the subsidy. And that is true.
We get the money.
But we don't necessarily get to keep it, because this inelasticity is there for a reason. We would need to have a lot of technicians, but if there is only a few of them, they will shoot up in price. So in that case, the technicians actually get to keep most of the subsidy.
Who gets the money?
Is first determined by elasticity. However, Seeing who actually profits from it in the end is much harder, because sellers here are buyers there. But luckily, we don't have to care about who gets to profit.
That's for people that choose for themselves.
If musicians are competing on price, and no one backs off at a certain point to do a different job, no amount of subsidy is going to change that. Subsidies only work to increase supply. So, for example, to create more concerts. But of course, the people giving these concerts are not making more money if they still decide to get
Paid in exposure.
subsidies. Still suck. Collectively paying for things that nobody wants or things that everyone is buying already doesn't make it better. Okay, sure, blah blah blah, money is good, and subsidies get divided between the blah 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 blah.
Now what?
It shouldn't have been there in the first place.
It's a socialist. It's a socialist scam.
Subsidies have no right to exist.
Or do they?
Subsidies are indeed wasteful. Let me show you. In this graph, this is the value of a concert to my audience, and these are my costs. One person gets a lot of value, but this last person doesn't like live music and only wants it for free. And the costs go up for each extra concert, because, for example, I have to rent more and more expensive places. So, when a subsidy comes in, for these extra concerts, we are collectively paying this amount, but we're only getting this as value. This is the value received by the buyers, so anything below that is fine. And this is the cost to sellers, so anything above that is fine.
But here,
the cost of each concert is higher than the value received. This triangle is the size of the loss due to
inefficiency.
And it would have been better not to give these concerts and just let the free market do its thing.
However,
as we have touched on before, the free market does not always price things right. For example, raising kids. It's clearly great for society to have more people, as they produce more on average than they consume. But no one is paying you for raising such a great kiddo. These are the benefits to the producers. But this might be the benefit to society at large.
that no one is paying for.
In this case, there are losses again, because this is what we would be willing to pay, while it should be this. Again, the stupid triangle of inefficiency shows its three faces.
But now it comes.
We can put these two inefficiencies against each other to get rid of both. To counteract inefficiencies in the market, the government has two tools: taxes and subsidies. Taxes make things artificially expensive, so less of it gets made. And subsidies make things artificially cheap, so more of it gets made. This means that no, we don't want to subsidize things that are correctly priced. That leads to inefficiencies. But if there is an unpriced burden in a market already,
We're gonna fix it, baby, with a subsidy or a tax.
First you say that subsidies are inherently inefficient, and then you go on to say that they can be used to get rid of other inefficiencies? That makes no sense.
if I have a flat tire, it won't help to drill another hole. What's wrong with
Hey,
you?
that's not how any of this works.
Well, do you know what doesn't work? Using analogies like that. Sometimes things don't get the right price. There's a plethora of reasons that could be the culprit. But let's use the example of raising children again. The price that people are willing to pay individually is way lower than the value we would actually receive collectively. We would lose this amount because of this natural inefficiency. Now, let's add a subsidy that's equal to the difference.
When done correctly.
The result is an efficient running market. But where did this inefficiency of the subsidy go? Well, it isn't actually related to the subsidy, but to the wrong price. A price that's either
Too high or too low.
that causes inefficiencies, not the subsidy. But yes, you heard that right.
When done correctly.
Sadly, it's not for nothing that subsidies are often blamed for being wasteful. Subsidies can, and often are, the reason for inefficiencies, because guessing the actual value of something is really hard. It's easy to undershoot, overshoot, or go in the wrong direction entirely. And even if you manage to guess it correctly, you can't really know for certain. And there will always be people that disagree with you.
The things that make it hard
are hidden costs and benefits. And these costs and benefits are not just hidden in plain sight. No, they can be so well hidden that they don't even exist.
What?
Imagine that we would subsidize everyone that wants to become a musician. We just give them a median income, no questions asked. That would probably lead to a boom in the amount of musicians and the highest level of music production ever. Not to mention all the musicians that can live their dream because so many more people would go to concerts.
Bravo.
Concerts would be close to free after all.
That's great.
Right? Well, no. We still collectively pay for this music, more than ever before, and we are losing out on a lot of other things. Let's say that a ridiculous 50% of all people become musicians.
Just to illustrate the point.
That would mean that every other job would have roughly half the amount of people to work with. This would of course lead to huge shortages in everything from food to healthcare and technology. With no subsidy, the rich would be the only ones able to afford many kinds of live music. But with too much subsidy, they would be the only ones that are able to afford
Basic needs.
Doing something actively wrong can cost us, like polluting a river or
Putting a lot of carbon in the atmosphere.
But doing a good thing too much can cost us just the same. But these costs are really well hidden, because it's the loss of something else.
That did not happen.
Guessing the relation between the value of something and its price is really, really hard. But it gets even worse.
It changes over time.
Now, there might not be enough musicians, but in a few years, there might be too many. Therefore, you would also need to get rid of your subsidies in time. Dude, I tell you, these subsidies are the worst thing to ever happen to humanity. We subsidize the wrong things and even the right things so much that we'd be better off without. Fossil fuels? What moron thought of subsidizing something that is ruining our planet. There is hidden costs that have been
Obvious for decades.
and we still have a subsidy on it? We subsidize education until people can basically start receiving their pension. We subsidize the living hell out of arts. And do you really think that a few extra drinks that are sold in the cafes near the museum will pay for the endless amount of hours that artists would have otherwise worked in actual jobs? Subsidies
are stupid.
Well, that's mostly right. Except for the artist part, of course. We are indeed subsidizing a lot of things of which we know they have quite some hidden costs, which only increases the inefficiencies that might be already in the market. But, of course, we should not forget the benefits. Don't be surprised that when you cut fossil fuel subsidies, everything shoots up in price, because everything uses fossil fuels in their supply chain, which would mean a lot of people
cannot afford life.
But does the benefit of cheaper things weigh up against the costs of a warmer planet? I personally think not. And I expect most people would actually agree these days.
But there is a small problem.
Getting rid of a subsidy is really hard. Way harder than expending one or making a few extra. That's again because some things are hidden. When we would cut the subsidy to a coal power plant, it's clear that there are people losing their jobs and maybe even a company that goes bankrupt because of it. Heck, maybe the grid explodes.
Objectively terrible consequences.
And we don't really notice the cost savings. Especially not if they are mostly far off in the future. And we don't notice that these people might find jobs that are actually producing more value. Either in a competing power plant where they replace someone that's worse,
By finding a different job.
and this perspective is only exacerbated for these people themselves. Of course they don't want to lose their subsidy. So sadly, cutting a subsidy is generally
Not a measure that will get you elected.
or re-elected for that matter. I believe that subsidies stick around for too long, which leads to costs that are generally not taken into account. Markets change over time, and when the subsidies don't change with it, you will perverse these subsidies. In that case, they enhance an inefficiency instead of being a counterweight to it. Once it was a great idea to use more fertilizer, more fossil fuels, more water, more transport, more. But slowly this changed. Now we know there's actually quite some costs associated with these things that are not being paid for. But getting rid of these subsidies?
That's
Hard. There are subsidies in many forms for many reasons, all with their unique strengths and weaknesses. Not only are there flat subsidies that give a fixed amount, there is also subsidies that pay a certain percentage. But you can also
Do it the other way around.
and subsidies for rent often stop at a certain amount. But of course, you can also make it start at a certain amount. And of course, the length can change. We can have a constant subsidy, like we talked about, but some are one time only, which makes it that prices will not change so much. In that case, it does matter which side you give it to. And not only can you choose the sellers or the buyers, You could also decide to give it to certain sellers or certain buyers. Inefficiencies in the market can be very specific, and luckily so can subsidies. And I hate to break it to you, but we are not actually perfect spheres in a vacuum, which means that all these things actually matter.
Is it good or is it bad? I need you to tell me what to think.
No thanks. Bye.